I am joined today by Jayant Chaudhary. Jayant is a visionary technology leader with a proven track record of saving businesses and large projects from the edge of failure. He has worked with clients like American Express, JP Morgan Chase, and US Bank to engineer their critical systems, and now applies the same expertise as the CTO and COO of Surreal Events, a spatial computing company. Jayant, thank you so much for being in my orbit and for joining me today on Cupalo Conversations.
It is my pleasure, Lauren. Thank you very much for having me on here. And I do appreciate the opportunity to be exposed to this audience that you have cultivated by doing really interesting podcasts over the last several months. So thank you again.
Well, this is great. I'm so excited to talk with you today because you have an incredible track record. As I mentioned in my intro, it is a small world. I'd love to make it a little bit smaller today with our conversation. And I'd love to hear more about your journey. So if you would, please share, how did you get into technology? How did you get to where you are today?
My journey began because my father, as I was going to university in India, my father kept reminding me that the humanities and arts that I wanted to study were not going to be a great financial choice, that I would not be able to get a great, well-paid job. And he was right. He was really the cleverest man I've ever known. So very, very well-grounded in fact. So I took his advice, moved out of India, went to the UK, got a couple of degrees in computer science, found a job as I was completing my second degree. And then from that point on, I've been employed or have been in business in the software or IT arena. And it's proven to be a very fulfilling journey. Obviously, I still am in touch with all the literature that I used to read, and the training that I got, the skills that I got from being able to appreciate good stories, a well-crafted plot, good communication. I mean, though all of those things have not gone to waste, I've still managed to use them. And I think I have an advantage. I would almost call it an unfair advantage against people who only read, computer science books or went to technology school and didn't really appreciate the joys of good literature. Because in my view, most of what we do in this world is storytelling. If you can tell a story well, you can do pretty much anything that you want to do, and people will enjoy your company. I mean, you sell because you tell a great story. You convince people of your proposal being the right proposal by telling a great story. You tell people how your solution is going to work technologically by telling a great story. So it's been a long but very satisfying journey.
Well, I know I might be a bit biased because I too is a literature major, but I think it is an incredible gift to be able to have insight into lives and journeys that I won't have the capacity to live myself. Life is very finite. And so having a window into a lot of different perspectives through that and having a command of the language and storytelling is critical to all facets of business, startups and enterprises alike. So I have to know, what are some of your absolute favorite classics?
Well, let's call them books, because Shakespeare is a great author, but his books might not be called classics. Merchant of Venice is one of my favorites, just because a lot of the language that we use today figures of speech are rooted in Merchant of Venice. I think it was literally the first book by Shakespeare that I ever read. I enjoy poetry as well. So Shelley, Keats, one of my favorite poems is An Ode to a Nightingale. It's a beautiful, beautiful poem. And then I also read a lot of what would absolutely not be considered classics. So things like what you would call pulp fiction, right? That used to be another channel. And basically because they are great storytellers, those very popular writers. My favorite author is P.G. Wodehouse. P.G. Wodehouse is the one author that I can read over and over again. And I'm still amazed to this day, after having read his books sometimes 5 or 6 times, at the command of the language that he had, at how he could weave sentences and make things that were, very, very plain sound so funny. So that's, to me, P.G. Wodehouse is God as far as writing is concerned.
Oh, that's wonderful. Have you ever been inspired yourself to write a fiction or to write poetry?
No, but I don't know that I can write poetry. Or with ChatGPT, a lot of people can, but I don't know. It won't come from my heart. I do write short stories. Some of those short stories have been published. Some short stories are kind of personal events that I've written about, that other people in the extended community that I belong to have read. So to me, writing tends to be based on personal events, personal incidents, and I find that it's good to be able to do that sometimes and still kind of remain in practice in terms of writing about things that are important to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it's very therapeutic. It can be a cathartic
Yes,
experience to try
yes,
to capture a moment in time or an experience of something. So
yes.
I think that's great. Walk me through when you're brought into an organization because you're often brought in when things are not going well. But I would love to know, when do they need you the most? When are you brought into both a startup and an enterprise organization to fix some problems?
Most organizations, most enterprises, startups don't really want to initially admit that they have a problem, right? And large enterprises actually have a much bigger appetite for sitting on problems for a very long time. I'll give you an example. I won't mention the name of the company, but it is on my LinkedIn profile. I was brought in because this company hadn't delivered its software for about 2 years. Um, and initially, when I was brought in as the CTO, and I was told that there's a problem. Things are going slower than usual. Then I joined the company. Then I realized slow meant nothing for 2 years. So when I walked into the project, the owners of the project, it's a very large company. They have, I would call them almost, they have bottomless pockets. But I think even they were getting tired of the fact that nothing was being done. So the reason I came in there was because people from my professional network knew about what I can do, and they brought me in. And the way these things happen is you'll often get in the target clientele, let's just say, where I make the biggest difference. You'll get these people who have a project that was supposed to deliver something, hasn't delivered something. No one really understands why. Uh, the the machinery is working, but the product's not being delivered, right? So they will come in and they'll ask the question as to what I can do, and I follow a process. So it's not all instincts. There's a process that I can take a look at, and I can tell with a very high degree of certainty that if you move these things around and if you change these parts of the process, then I can usually make a difference within the first month. So within 30 days of walking in, I can get the project back on track in a way that's demonstrable. So it's not, it's not like I just tell people things are back on track. You can see that things have started moving. You start delivering long delayed components of the project. So my skill is to understand what's going wrong on a what I'd consider a project with a lot of moving parts, with many different skill sets, including business people who are contributing to the project, to convey to them what the problems are in a language, in a story that actually makes sense to them, right? And then convince them of the need to make changes that need to be made. So, for example, just going back to this project that was 2 years late, the biggest reason it was late was because there were competing groups of stake owners. So the people who were sponsoring the project, there were three groups that were putting money into the product that was going to be delivered. They all had competing priorities, and they all had people on the project who kind of looked out for themselves and their group, but not for the entire piece of software. Um, as a result, and because of inexperience and because of the people who were running the project not being able to say no at the right times, they had 26 different sets of requirements. And it was just a horrendous, confusing mess of things that would never have worked. So when I walked in, what I did was I stopped the project from doing anything for the first week. I scrapped 25 sets of requirements, brought it down to one, uh, took away anyone's ability to provide requirements on Word documents or Excel spreadsheets or email. Everything went into Jira, which is a great tool for most people in our world know it, but it's a great project management tool, issue tracking tool as well. And then restarted when everyone knew what they were supposed to do, and there was only one set of priorities. So you could not have 5 or 6 different competing priorities that were all supposed to be delivered at the same time. As a result, so in about 3 months' time, so the first month we stabilized the project, we started delivering software. 3 months from then, we did our first release of the software, not the full set, but the first large component. And then the entire project was delivered after that. So it took about a year and a half, but then it went back on track and was delivered. And that project, that product today is being used by those companies to offer a major travel engine. So it worked out in the end.
That's great. Well, going back to storytelling, not only do you have to tell a story of what solution to be offered, but I imagine when you walk into an organization, they're telling you a story as well. Do you think people are bad estimators and bad storytellers when you walk into an organization? Is that part of your problem that you're solving too, is getting people to have a sense of source of truth?
So yeah, what I've noticed is when people start telling stories about how they've estimated how long something's going to take for them to achieve, their ideas are kind of based on the level of experience that they have. And a great example of this was when I was working on a project for Thomson Reuters. And that project, I was only brought in at the last moment because the people who were working on the project, the 2 most senior guys, got really, really ill within a space of 1 week from each other. So they had to go off the project. This project had to be delivered. I come in, and the person who was kind of one of the junior developers, who was familiarizing me with the project, started telling me about how long it would take for them, Thomson Reuters, to get a certain component ready. And he said, it's going to take me a week. And I said, to me, this looks like it's much more of a close to 6-month process. And he and his boss were all very curious about why. And then I explained to them that when you estimate in an enterprise, your estimates are not what it's going to take for you to write a piece of code that works on your laptop. Right? That's easy. Most people can write code quickly, and within a week you can actually get a lot of work done. But organizations that are a large size, with privacy constraints, with financial oversight, with enterprise class architecture, with deployment happening in their own data centers or their own cloud, they follow a very regimented process. So you can't just write a piece of code and then put it out for people to use. You've got to go through the process. So I explained to him and his boss what he had to do was to write the code, but then he also had to write test cases for them. Then he had to have people go through the test cases as he was providing that information to them. And then once it's been tested, the next piece is to roll it out to one of the environments, which is from the dev environment to the QA to staging to production. All of this has to be scripted. You don't actually just put your laptop out there. It has to be in scripts that run by in production from people who are not allowed to touch the environment. So, and as it turned out, this is one of the benefits of being experienced. It was a 6-month process. It was exactly what I had said it was going to be. So my objective when I hear these stories is to find out what is being missed, what are people not accounting for, and then to gently point out that these are the things that you'll have to do. And if you don't do them, then someone else has to do them. and eventually, when you get to the point where you have to deliver, it's better to tell your audience, which might be your C-level people in a company, it might be outside shareholders, it might be in your startup, it might be a couple of the people that you are co-founding a company with. It's better to tell them all of these things need to follow a certain process, and only then can you deliver something that's meaningful to you, that's useful to you.
How do you build trust quickly so that you can be respected in your opinion and have the authority of someone coming in, especially from the outside? How do you gain their trust quick enough to then be able to help shepherd them through what I imagine is a laborious and often time consuming process and
Yeah.
might even expose some of their shortcomings along the way.
Yeah. My objective is to help the company, and it's not to help one specific individual when I go into the company. So I'm usually brought in by somebody whom I've known for years, right? Sometimes not, but mostly that's the case. And when I go in, what I try to do is to not point out shortcomings. I try to point out where the process did not work or where the process was not even put in place. Typically, those conversations, once you start telling people about, these are all components that need to follow a certain process, that's a theoretical conversation. And then people tend to like to be able to say, okay, so this is best practice. It's not about me or you, it's best practice. We can see that we didn't follow this at some point. Then the next piece of from there is to practice complete transparency and complete honesty. So if you see things that will never work, and the client or somebody who has authority at the client side uh, tells you, can you just try to make it work? Or we don't want to change this, even though you know that that change is necessary. Can you try and do this without changing this piece or without pointing out that piece? I actually say no upfront. And the reason for doing that is I know it won't get them the results that they're looking for. And eventually it's going to be a failure, and it's probably just going to continue the trend that they have experienced so far. So most people in a group, sometimes an individual might not behave the way you expect them to behave, which is reasonably and logically. But in a group, most people tend to come to a point where they begin to understand what you are trying to do is based on, number one, a process, right? It's not just something that I come up with on the spur of the moment. And number two, it's going to help them deliver something that they have been sometimes killing themselves trying to deliver. The figure of speech, which is the whippings will continue until morale improves. Well, sometimes that's what's been happening to people within these organizations. Someone comes and tells them how how badly they have been doing, but this is still expected next week, and then it's never fun for people. So generally speaking, they tend to be happy to learn in terms of what they can do to change the situation.
What are the challenges unique to startups versus an enterprise organization?
Startups get into trouble when they find their first real customer. So as they are defining their software, as they're writing the first few versions, they can afford to be very, very agile, very nimble. They can change things around. No one's asked them to provide real business value in terms of a contracted obligation, right? And once you sell your software, once you sell your services, whether you're providing it as a service over the web, or if you are doing it as a B2B service, either SaaS or something that's delivered to large organizations on premise through the data center, it doesn't matter which one of those situations you fit into, but creating a product is much more difficult than creating software. And what I mean by that is very simple to explain. So if you take any piece of software, let's just talk about a calculator, like a financial calculator. I can write code for that. So can, I think, a million other people, and I can whip up a great web-based front end. I can open that up to people, and I can provide a service. It's something that's useful to people. Now let's just say that a bank decides to be my client. They want me to brand that as a calculator, a financial calculator that they want to offer up to their clients, right? And based on the results of what the calculator does, they want their clients to be able to take certain decisions. Suddenly, what has happened now is, and this is why it's so simple to explain, suddenly what has happened right now is it has to be secure, right? The security is a huge concern. And this tends to be one of the things that most startups don't think about. Uh, It's a huge concern, not just because people can get hacked or private information can get public, but you just have to follow a very, very regimented, strict process to be certified by a bank as a service provider. If you don't have that process in place, it's going to take you months, sometimes years, to get to that point where you are certified. That's number one. Number two, the data that you are interacting with, that's the bank's data. It's the bank's client's data. It has safeguards in place. You have to make sure that those safeguards apply to the data that you're touching. If you're touching it with your own software, you have to make sure that you certify, again, that your software passes those criteria. Auditing. Banks will always want to come back and make sure that what you did followed the promises you made within your contract. So you have to have auditing. You have to have logging. You have to be able to measure your service level agreements. So all of these things are not what I would consider functional aspects of what you do, right? So functionally, your software works. But now, as soon as you give it to a customer or you try to sell it to a customer, you have to do all of these things that are one level above that: non-functional requirements, organizational requirements, privacy requirements, sometimes regulatory requirements. And to understand what you are not doing, sometimes it's a bitter experience to learn from making a mistake, especially in heavily regulated industries. You will actually lose your client if your software ever leaks data. Banks will never work with you again. You'll just get a bad name. And that kind of potential risk occurs across industries. Most customers want your software not just to function, they want it to function based on what their guidelines and their processes and their regulations are. So those are the things that startups run into, and they spend an inordinate amount of time and expense on trying to kind of fulfill the terms of their contract with the first set of customers.
Makes sense. How often are you taking customer feedback into your turnaround strategy?
All the time. So the first day or two, it's all about getting feedback. And there's a certain reason for that. So if I went to a startup today, and for the purposes of an example, let's just say they signed up American Express, and they are going to give American Express a way to create marketing websites very quickly. And they have this great product that creates marketing websites very quickly. If I go to them and I tell them, you're 6 months late, and American Express is going to, you told me American Express is going to fire you because you are not able to do what they want you to do. Tell me what about this contract is the most important part that you want to handle first. So again, your circumstances, facing a delay, facing non-delivery, your circumstances might be very different. Sometimes the part of the contract that companies, my clients, want to handle first is, how do you get us out of this hole so we can show that something works and it works within the environment. Well, in that case, based on that feedback, my course of action is going to be very different. I'm going to target, creating a environment that is a close replica of what they already have, the things are working, and then we are going to try and make things work within that very controlled environment on the client side. If what they want to do is to make sure that auditing is being performed or security is being certified, then again, those courses of action are going to be different. So getting feedback on what their immediate needs are, because we are trying to get that done within the first month, what the immediate needs are, and then what can be reprioritized as being kind of pushed off to the second month or a little later. That is another piece of the service that I offer. And the reason for this is, again, inexperience tends to be manifested in a couple of ways. But one of the ways where people run into problems is when they have 5 or 6 competing priorities, right? So everything is number one. You've got to handle all of them at the same time. But you're a startup. You don't have 100 people doing all of these things for you. So it's usually a small group of people, small war chest, right? And then you'll run out of money or you run out of people. So instead of doing that, create a list of priorities, talk to your customers, make sure they're very transparent with your customers as well. let them know this is the way you're going to solve the problem, and then just deliver. So once you decide what the course of action is going to be, then make sure that you deliver small wins, and you do that quickly so that you build trust back. And once you do that, I've realized that most companies, especially large organizations, are very forgiving of delays because they expect that most things are going to take 2 or 3 times longer than they budget for. So as long as you show them progress, they will forgive a lot of your initial delays. Things tend to get forgotten after you start succeeding.
What about morale being low among employees? I imagine when things are not going out into the wild, when they're blowing deadlines, blowing budget, that has a really negative impact on teams. When you come in, I imagine you've seen some low morale. How do you address that? And do you address that, I guess, because that does seem like a critical component is getting people to buy into this new plan, this new vision, and you're trying to get them back on board to be able to start building again. How do you address the low morale of a team?
I know two things are always going to happen when I go in. I know that the person who was in charge of the project, if he or she hasn't been fired, then they will always try to backstab me. It always happens. It happens, and I'm always prepared for it. And I'll tell you how I prepare for that. And the second part of this is I also know that a bunch of people who are kind of lower down in the organization, usually working for this person who has not been able to kind of get the results that they were entrusted with getting. I tend to find that those people have a lot of creativity and a lot of skills that they have been bottling up because the interpersonal communication and the relationships are so frayed that they don't even want to be part of the organization anymore. Sometimes they're just waiting for a chance to get out, trying to find a different job. That same company that I was talking about, where they hadn't delivered anything for 2 years, I had that experience with the guy who was responsible for delivering. He tried really hard to kind of undermine the entire group all the time, and he wasn't able to because what ends up happening is I try to make sure that everyone realizes that a success is everybody's success, a failure is everybody's failure. So let's all just get on the same team and start pulling in the same direction. And most people want to do that. There are only a couple of people in organizations that have the egos kind of tied to proving that everyone else is wrong and they were right, and people should just have taken them seriously. And within the first week to 2 weeks, if these people are still pulling in the wrong direction, I talk to the people who bring me in. I let them know that this is not going to be tenable, and I make it their problem. It's not my job to fire people as I come in, unless bring me in and make it my job. And the second piece is sometimes you'll find out. So one of the companies that I've worked with, it was extremely overstaffed and it was paying people a lot of money. And all of these people were either trying to manufacture work for themselves, right? So they had no real work, but they were just kind of doing make busy work. And the company was bleeding money. So I have walked into an organization, then I've talked to the people who were, responsible for running the company, and I've shown them, look, here's the real size of the team that would perform, that would do what you needed to do. All of these people are, extra capacity. Nobody wants to spend extra money or have people who don't do anything. So I make it their problem again. And if they want me to provide that message, I try to do it with empathy.
Wow. I feel like there's no end to the number of facets of issues that you address. And I almost imagine this sort of like you're like a mechanic looking over a car going one checklist, like through a checklist of one area after another.
Mhm.
And I am wondering, do you find that you have a mental checklist, or maybe even you have a real checklist of these are the 10 things I always look at when I open the hood, when I get into a place? Do you follow the same formulaic process every single time you go in?
Yes, I do. I do. So the first thing I look for is whether the project or product that's in trouble is following a process, right? And I've been surprised a couple of times because I've gone in to an enterprise expecting that everything would be enterprise grade. People would follow a project management process, requirements would be in place, et cetera, et cetera. And then I've been surprised because they just weren't doing that. Number one, always make sure that they're following a process to deliver. It can be agile, it can be waterfall, it can be a mix of the two. Most companies that tell you they're completely agile are not actually completely agile. So, but just be practical with that. Number two, how do you know once you write requirements, once you have project requirements, how do you know that you can certify to your audience, to the owners of the product, that the product or the service does what it's supposed to do? So test-driven development, right? How do you write tests that will guarantee that what you are getting paid to do is being delivered and can be tested? These two things tend to be, in terms of process, these two things tend to be the most overlooked or the most badly done. If I know that these two things are going to be objectively done well, then the next thing that I look at is interpersonal relationships. So who's working on the project, who is necessary, who is an impediment, how do we get the people who are impediments either into pulling in the same direction or get them out of the organization. So that is number three. Number four, how do we break up the project life cycle so we deliver in quick bites, quick wins, so that people can become enthusiastic about delivering, and so can their audience, their product owner, their clients. And beyond all of this, what I start looking at, so once I put all of these things into place, what I start looking at is the cadence of delivery, the cadence of interactions. How do people interact with each other on a daily basis when they see these things come down the pipeline? Do they talk to each other? Do they try and come up with good solutions? Is the usual reaction one of pushing back against changes, or do they embrace change? And then when they embrace change, are they very open and transparent about what that's going to mean for the resulting deadlines or timelines? Because a lot of people kind of bottle up this information, which tells them, if I make these changes, there's going to be a delay, but I don't want to be blamed for the delay. So I'm just going to be quiet, and then I'm going to expose that delay very close to the deadline. So just good practice in terms of how you deliver. If all of these things are in place, then your project is going to run really well. But it's quite difficult to get people to pull together and start delivering anything, and that includes software.
Do you think people could benefit from applying very similar methodologies to any goal or any number of goals in their lives with regards to habits, with regards to discipline, with regards to self-awareness? Like, what would you say for yourself, I guess, in terms of applying what you bring into an organization to the individual level?
It's actually a great question. And a good friend of mine, someone I grew up with, and I were sitting actually right there. We were talking about this very subject. And we plan to, in fact, we've done the preparatory work, but we do plan to start a service where we talk to people who are kind of mid-level technology workers who want to do more than be individual contributors, and who want to kind of grow into more of a management position, to teach them what skills are going to be necessary for them to overcome what they consider limitations. And I call them limitations because I've noticed a lot of people who are really good code creators. They have great personalities when you talk to them one-on-one, very cooperative. They'll do the job every time. But some of them, I've realized by talking to them, they're quite frustrated because they don't see kind of from the people who are above them on the organization a recognition of the fact that they can do more. They want to take on more responsibility. And I was lucky because I was given more responsibility almost accidentally, because anytime someone asked me to do more than what I was doing, I always said yes. And my attitude was, I'm just going to learn how to do it well. And that worked out for me. But there are people who don't have that opportunity or don't know how to approach that that opportunity, how to get that opportunity. So what we are doing is going to be providing uh, a way for individual technology contributors to talk to me, talk to this other person who's actually quite a successful technology executive as well. And what we want to teach people how to do well is, number one, how to ask for more responsibility, how to fit into those roles. So how to grow your personality to be seen as a natural fit to these roles, and how to solve the really important problems every time. So when people think about who your problem solver is, they always think of you. So it's not always that you get a chance to apply for a job. Sometimes opportunities come to you, right? Because your boss or somebody who works in the organization in a parallel part of the company might have a problem that you become aware of. Offer yourself up. We'll show you how to do that. We'll show you how to communicate to make sure that your offer is a good story. It tells a good story. It explains how you're going to solve the problem, how to take up more responsibility, and how to grow in your career. So we've been struggling with the exact name. We don't want to call it Mr. Fixer's Academy, but we'll call it something that makes sense for people who are at that stage of their careers.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think we're all desperate for more resources on how to maximize our value in this world. My last question for you today is, you're in a very unique role. You go into organizations where you're the fixer
Mm-hmm.
and you work yourself out of a job and
Yes.
you get to, that's a good thing.
Yes.
And I want to know, how does that feel? How does it feel to come in knowing that it's finite in a really big way, as opposed to someone who goes in, accepts a full-time role, really builds around the organization a
Yeah.
team or builds a mission and sees that for years through? What does it feel like to walk in knowing that you're going to essentially work yourself out of a job? And that's the whole point.
Yes. So sometimes it tends to be really finite. I'll go in and it's usually for 3 or 6 months. So there's a contract around it. And I started working on, under a contracted term quite early in my career. So that part of it doesn't really bother me. What is, I actually enjoy having some free time at the end of these projects. So right now I'm enjoying what I'd consider kind of a lull in my professional life. We worked with Surreal, we worked really, really hard on a very, very high profile project, which was in a time zone that was several hours ahead of us. So sleepless nights, et cetera, just to make sure that the customer was extremely happy. And now that that project has ended and it's been delivered, I'm at a point where I can take a more relaxed pace. I like reading, so I take this opportunity as well. And then sometimes you just realize that it's variety. I enjoy the fact that I can go on to a new project where I can see, in terms of parameters, it's going to be the same problem to solve, but it's going to look different. It's going to have a different type of urgency. The client's going to have different expectations. So there are always things that change, and I do enjoy that change. I'm also not really good at kind of doing the same job over and over again. So this keeps me very interested in what I'm doing.
Oh, I'm so glad. And you're obviously very talented at it. And like you said, you make use of the gap spaces between to read and also enjoy some downtime, which is important in life. So I'm so grateful to have met you. I'm so glad that I'm in your orbit. And I would love to continue to be a witness to the great things that you're doing to help turn teams and products around and helping customers get what they actually want out of an organization. So it sounds like you're doing some incredible work out there. And I would love to, again, continue to be in your orbit and an advocate of it. So thank you so much, Jayant, for joining me today on Cupalo Conversations and for sharing your wisdom.
My absolute pleasure. In fact, I know you're going to go out and be on the road and still work. So I'm actually very interested in your professional journey as well. And I intend to be following your blog and finding out everything you've been up to. Thank you very much for inviting me.